Common Sense Revisited, Introduction. My dear inheritors of this republic. I am Thomas Paine, once a stranger upon your shores, now a stranger once more, summoned, it seems, by the long echo of an idea I helped kindle 2.5 centuries ago. I left your world in the early days of its republican infancy, when the paint on the new nation was barely dry. I returned to find it grown beyond any hope my generation dared whisper. A great experiment, to establish a government of the people. By the people? For the people? Once fragile as a trembling flame, now a mighty light illuminating the world. A nation of hundreds of millions, stretching from sea to sea, built upon a declaration that ordinary people, not kings, not conquerors, not bloodlines, might rule themselves. For this achievement I offer you my admiration, my astonishment, and my profound respect. Yet I confess, with sorrow, that admiration is not the only reason I have returned. I sense in your time the same tremors my generation once felt before revolution, fear, confusion, mistrust, and the slow, creeping advance of powers that seek to govern not by consent, but by manipulation, powers that whisper to citizens that their neighbors are foes, that truth is a matter of loyalty, and that freedom can be traded for security without paying a terrible price. It was for such reasons that I took up my pen in 1776. Here, 250 years later, I take up my pen in a spirit half solemn, half astonished, returning as an old friend tapping upon your window, asking gently, remember the story I write to remind you of. Before you can understand why I write again now, you must know what compelled me the first time. When I arrived in America in 1774, I was but a failed corset maker, an impoverished son of England, arriving sick and nearly broken. But I carried with me an idea, that government ought to be judged by the happiness it brings to the people, and that no crown, no empire, had the right to demand the obedience of a free soul without offering justice in return. The British monarchy felt differently. In the winter of 1775-76, the air in Philadelphia held a cold sharper than steel. Congress met in long debates by day, and out in the taverns and streets, whispers travelled like wind through alleys, are we truly to break from Britain? Or merely protest and submit again? You must understand, your idea of democracy, so ordinary to your ears, was then a miracle no one had ever seen. The notion that the people were the wellspring of all power, that leaders were servants at laws, not individuals, held sovereignty. This was not merely untested. It was dangerous. We lived under a monarch who believed the colonies were his property, his inheritance, his birthright. A king is the very denial of democracy, for he proclaims by his existence that power can be inherited like a coat or a chair. Yet in those days, many good people still clung to the hope that King George III might show mercy. They believed if we shouted loud enough, he would hear. But the truth was more bitter, he had already turned his ear toward tyranny, and tyranny never bends back toward reason. I recall soldiers quartered in the homes of humble families without their consent, women forced to serve the very troops who oppressed them. I saw the Stamp Act, Tea Act, and other taxes imposed without representation, insults laid atop injuries. I witnessed colonists dragged into courts across the sea, punished by laws devised by men who had never walked our forests nor seen the sweat of our brows. It was not merely unjust. It was dehumanizing. To be governed and abused by those who do not know, see or respect you is tyranny. The birth of common sense. I had no special place in society. I was not a general, nor a scholar, nor an heir to fortune. I was a corset maker's son with more ink than wealth to my name. But I had something rare, I understood the hearts of ordinary people because I was one. I had watched farmers give their last grain to feed their families, only to find their stores seized to support an empire's wars. I had seen apprentices whipped for speaking against a king they had never met. And I had seen the courage boiling quietly in towns and farms, waiting for a spark. My pamphlet, Common Sense, was not written for scholars or statesmen. It was written for farmers, tradesmen, merchants, bookbinders, blacksmiths, mothers, soldiers, and every ordinary citizen denied a voice. When I wrote the pamphlet the colonies were politically divided, the battles at Lexington and Concord had already happened, the war had begun. Yet, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation with Britain. Congress had not yet declared independence. We were emotionally stressed, angry and unsure. There was fear, confusion, and suspicion about what independence would mean. People were divided, roughly 1/3 loyalists, 1/3 patriots, 1/3 undecided. We were economically saddled with trade restrictions, taxes, and blockades were hurting livelihoods. We were socially divided with a growing desire for reason, rights, liberty as we witnessed a rising resentment over British troops in our towns. The colonies were a match waiting for a spark. I wrote Common Sense, not to inspire war, but to inspire courage. To tell a people who had been made to kneel that they had every right to stand. The key and important points of my pamphlet were simple, emotional and revolutionary. 1. Monarchy is illegitimate, and absurd. No one person should have absolute unquestionable power. No human has a natural right to rule another simply by birth. The British system was corrupt, oppressive, and fundamentally irrational. 2. America's connection to Britain harmed the colonies. Britain dragged America into European wars. Britain's economic control prevented the colonies from thriving independently. Britain protected its own interests, at America's expense. 3. Independence is not only necessary, it is inevitable. The colonies had grown too large and complex to remain dependent. Delay would only make the break more painful. America already had the population, resources, and moral justification to become a nation. 4. America could form a better, more just government. Common Sense offered an outline for a representative democracy. It proposed a continental congress, fair laws, and checks on power, showing independence wasn't chaos, it was a plan. 5. The time to act was imminent. Neutrality was not possible. Continued loyalty meant continued oppression. A decisive break would bring unity, strength, and a future free of monarchy. The pamphlets spread quicker than a prairie fire. Taverns read it aloud. Alexander Hamilton felt in them the heartbeat of a nation yet unborn. Henry and John Laurens, father and son, carried them in their letters, letting them speak where cannons could not. Thomas Jefferson found in them a companion voice for liberty, as he drafted a Declaration of Independence. And George Washington shared them with his troops at Valley Forge, reminding them what suffering was for. A new idea took root, that the people were the rightful source of power. That leaders served only by their consent. That the law, not the ruler, was sovereign. This was your democracy's dawning. And your freedom came at a terrible cost. I walked among ragged soldiers at Valley Forge, where hunger gnawed their ribs and frostbite stole their toes. They were farmers, shopkeepers, boys barely grown, but they stood against the greatest empire of the age. Women carried ammunition through snowstorms. Families starved while their sons marched to war. Merchants lost ships to British cannons. The signers of the Declaration risked their entire lives, their homes, their fortunes, their families' safety. Liberty did not fall from the sky like gentle rain. It was carved out of suffering. Thousands died not knowing whether their sacrifice would birth a nation or be swallowed by the void. But they believed, fiercely, stubbornly, that future generations might enjoy what they themselves might never see. And you, my reader, are that future. What they built was not for their time alone. They built it for you. And for the generation after you, and the one after that, and for every child not yet born. What you inherited. From their suffering emerged blessings we seldom fully appreciate. Indeclinable freedoms that for the time being you still possess. You may speak your mind without fear of a knock at midnight. You may worship, or refuse to worship, as your conscience guides. You may assemble peacefully, change leaders peaceably, vote without bloodshed. You may question power without being crushed by it. You may disagree publicly, loudly, freely. These are not small privileges. They are the pillars of your entire way of life. And yet, as I have returned to your century, I see troubling signs, familiar shadows that darkened the days before 1776. Not from a single danger, but from the slow erosion that threatens all free societies. Truth twisted beyond recognition, devotion to individuals over ideas, violence whispered as a political instrument, political vengeance replaced productive policy, demolition with no plans how to build anew, the real challenges for humanity being lost in the divisive noise, neighbor set against neighbor until trust thins like worn cloth, citizens encouraged to fear one another more than they fear tyranny. Tyranny seldom arrives with chains in hand. It arrives softly, on the back of confusion, division, fear, and mistrust. When truth becomes a matter of loyalty, when dissent becomes treason, when leaders elevate themselves above the law, when citizens see each other as enemies, the foundation of democracy shakes. I write because your republic trembles, not from an external foe, but from forces within, forces that any nation, of any time, must guard against if it wishes to remain free. You stand at a threshold my generation once faced. Will the people remember their own power? Will they reclaim their birthright as the stewards of liberty? Will they resist the slow poison of division and fear? Or will the great experiment falter? This second attempt to inspire common sense as America reaches 250 years is not born of despair, but of hope, hope that the people of America still know how to lift their eyes from the quarrels of the moment and see the nation they were meant to keep. For democracy is not a birthright that renews itself without effort. My friends, I am Thomas Paine. Our great nation faces confusion, mistrust, and a tide of manipulation, so I write to remind you of the eternal truths that must anchor a republic lest it drift into the sea. I write because the cause of America is, and has always been, the cause of humanity itself. Let us begin. The first truth, the power has always been yours. Before I tell you any of the dangers your nation faces, or any of the remedies I believe you still possess, I must begin with the single, immovable truth upon which all free societies depend. You, the people, are the power. Not your leaders. Not your parties. Not your factions. You. Unless that truth is rekindled in your hearts, every other warning I offer will fall like seeds on frozen ground. This, then, is the first and most important point I must impress upon you: democracy survives only when the people remember their own authority. And democracy collapses the moment they forget it. Permit me to tell you how I learned this. In 1775, I walked the muddy streets of Philadelphia and saw fear in every face. The colonies had grown restless, the king's edicts grew crueler with each passing month. Soldiers patrolled the towns. Congress debated. Yet most ordinary people felt powerless. Who are we to challenge an empire? They asked. Who are we to shape our own destiny? I understood this despair well. I had lived under monarchy all my life. I had bowed my head, paid my taxes, swallowed my tongue, and believed, as millions did, that leaders were born to rule, and the common folk were born to obey. But as the fires of liberty began to spark across the colonies, I witnessed something remarkable. I saw it in the farmers who refused to sell grain to the British Army, in the women who smuggled messages past enemy lines, in the blacksmiths who forged bayonets through the night. The people, who believed themselves small, discovered they were mighty. It was not Washington alone who birthed the revolution. Nor Jefferson. Nor Franklin. It was the merchant who closed his shop to march, the mother who fed hungry soldiers, the enslaved man who fled to fight for freedom, the schoolboys who carried water to dying men, the preachers who spoke of liberty from their pulpits. These were the true engines of liberty. And so the first mind shift took root: power does not flow downward from the throne. It rises upward from the people. Once they believed this, monarchy collapsed like a rotten beam. The people must unlearn their powerlessness. You have been told 1,000 times that you are divided, helpless, voiceless, that your influence is small and the world too large. This is not true. It has never been true. No leader owns the government. No party owns the nation. No faction owns the truth. They are merely temporary instruments of the public will. The people are the only sovereign authority in a democracy. I stand before you as a man who saw a ragged, starving, untrained population defeat the greatest empire of its age. They did so not by unity of opinion, but by unity of principle, that liberty belongs to the people. The colonists gathered in taverns and meeting halls. They argued, debated, questioned. They doubted the king. They doubted Parliament. And, most importantly, they doubted the lie that they were powerless. This was the first revolution, not on the battlefield, but in the mind. I write to remind you. The power is not in Washington. A republic must fear demagogues who claim they alone can fix everything, factions that stir hatred to gain power, voices that urge you to fear one another rather than question them, media that seeks profit from your division, leaders who test how much loyalty they can demand before you notice the ground shifting beneath your feet. It is in the millions who rise each morning, earn their bread, raise their children, speak their thoughts, and choose, by vote or by voice, the shape of their society. It begins with you. A people that remembers its own power cannot be ruled by fear. A people that forgets it, will be ruled by whoever learns to frighten them. This, my reader, is the first truth. All others follow from it. And having laid it before you, I will proceed, in the truths to come, to show how this truth has been obscured in your time, and how you may reclaim it. But for now, carry this with you like a lantern: the Republic is yours. It always was. And only you can keep it. The second truth: a republic cannot stand without a shared reality. Having reminded you that the power of a nation rests not in its rulers but in its people, I must now confront a danger that would have shocked even the most imaginative minds of my century. How can a people govern themselves if they no longer agree on what is real? In my day, we fought kings, armies, and empires. You fight something far more insidious: the poisoning of truth itself. When truth falters, tyranny prospers. In 1776, truth was our revolution's most precious ally. We told the truth about the king's abuses. We told the truth about our rights. We told the truth about our own burdens and responsibilities. A free people must be able to look at the world together and say, this is what is happening. Let us reason from here. Some among you live in one world, others in another. Each world has its own facts, its own enemies, its own prophets. Your devices, glowing scrolls that whisper day and night, divide you faster than any tyrant could have dreamed. A people who cannot agree on the nature of the problem cannot agree on the nature of the solution. This is how liberty slips, not by force, but by bewilderment. The founders understood the importance of shared truth. George Washington, whom I knew and admired, once said, "Truth will ultimately prevail where pains are taken to bring it to light." He believed this because the revolution depended on a common understanding of its purpose. The soldiers at Valley Forge did not freeze for political theater. They froze because they knew what they fought for, and why. None of these men agreed on every point, far from it. But they agreed on the reality before them. They saw tyranny. They named it. They resisted it. A republic needs no unanimity of opinion, but it demands unanimity of perception of the world in which it lives. Masters of deception, drowning in falsehoods. You imagine misinformation to be a plague of your own times, some curse ushered in by wires, screens, and algorithms. I assure you, it plagued us just the same. In late 1775, I overheard a tavern keeper shout, "I've it on the best authority. General Washington has deserted the army. He's fled to the Carolinas. The British will pardon any who swear loyalty by the week's end." His patrons gasped. Some gathered their coats and quit the room, intent on returning to the king's grace before it was too late. The rumor was, of course, a fiction. A deliberate invention. A weapon designed to collapse the rebellion not by musket fire, but by doubt. Doubt, left unchecked, becomes paralysis. Paralysis becomes surrender. Surrender results in tyranny. Truth was our only defense. These lies were not clever. They required only that people accept them as convenient. Tyranny does not need you to believe its lies, only to abandon the effort of verifying them. The moment a citizen says, verification is too much trouble, democracy begins to rot. The new form of tyranny is confusion. In today's world, tyranny may simply create so much noise, so much anger, fear, rumor, suspicion, and distortion, that the people throw up their hands and say, everyone is lying. Nothing can be certain. Let someone else decide for me. This surrender, quiet, weary, unannounced, is the death of democracy. It is not rebellion you must fear, it is resignation. For resignation leaves the field open for whoever shouts the loudest, manipulates the cleverest, or divides the deepest. When truth becomes fog, power belongs to whoever controls the lantern. The first step is not agreement, but reality. I do not ask you to agree on every subject. A free people should argue, for argument sharpens the mind, and liberty dulls in complacency. But arguments must be born from facts, not from fantasies. Your founders disagreed passionately. Jefferson and Adams quarreled so fiercely they did not speak for years, yet both returned to truth when the nation called. This is what you must recover. Not a shared ideology, but a shared reality. Not shared opinions, but shared facts. A republic can survive conflict. It cannot survive delusion. How can we the people restore the ground of reality? It is the same remedy we used in my age, though the battlefield has changed. 1. Question all voices that profit from your fear. Fear is the easiest lever of control. Whoever urges you to fear your neighbor more than you fear the loss of liberty is not your ally. 2. Seek truth across divides. If you only hear one world, you will forget the others exist. A democracy requires ears as much as voices. Ask the questions. How do I know that's true? What am I assuming? What evidence would change my mind? What would someone who disagrees with me say? Most people live, not in what is true, but by what they've heard the most. Every untested belief is dangerous. If you were born in another country, into another race, in another socio-economic class, would your views still hold true? What would happen if everyone thought like you? What do you think will happen if we continue this way? 3. Reward honesty, not spectacle. Your attention is a kind of currency. Spend it wisely. 4. Trust evidence over emotion. Feelings may be stirred, facts must be verified. 5. Remember that liberty cannot be guarded by the uninformed. A republic demands vigilance. Not blind agreement, but informed participation. This, my dear reader, is the second truth. If you commit to seeking truth rather than noise, you become, once again, the safeguard of the republic. In the next truth I speak of how tyranny gains power not through force, but through the slow, steady erosion of trust between citizens. For now, let truth be your compass, and do not surrender it to anyone who benefits from your confusion. The third truth, tyranny begins where trust ends. If truth is the foundation of a free society, then trust is its mortar. Without it, no republic, no matter how brilliantly designed, can stand for long. Tyranny does not require a tyrant. It merely requires that citizens cease to trust one another. For once trust is broken, the people become weak, frightened, divided, and then they may be led by any hand bold enough to grasp them. In 1775, I saw something alarming. America was nearly lost not because of the power of the British, but because the colonies nearly stopped trusting one another. Colonists who once traded, worshipped, and labored together, began to whisper that those across the lane were loyalists, agents of the crown, traitors to liberty. Neighbors who had exchanged bread now exchanged suspicion. Men who once disagreed on tax policy now suspected one another of conspiracy. It was only when ordinary people, farmers, shopkeepers, sailors, looked beyond suspicion and stood as one that the revolution became possible. For a people at war with each other cannot unite against true oppression. Your age faces a crisis of trust unlike any I have known. You possess wonders unimaginable to my century, instant communication, limitless information, voices from every corner of the nation. Yet these marvels, which should knit you together, have too often driven you apart. You are told daily that, your neighbor is your enemy, your fellow citizen is a threat. Those who vote differently cannot be trusted, those who speak differently must be silenced, those who question must be punished, those who disagree must be shamed. Division does the tyrant's work without his presence. A republic dies when its citizens no longer believe their countrymen mean them well. For then every election becomes a battle for survival, every disagreement becomes a war, and every political figure becomes a savior, or a devil. A nation cannot stand upon such ground. How tyranny exploits distrust. In times of mutual suspicion, manipulative voices arise. I do not speak of parties or persons, but of a timeless danger. When a people cease to trust each other, they become desperate for someone, anyone, to trust. And thus they place their hope in, the loudest speaker, the boldest accuser, the most confident pretender, the one who promises safety from one's own neighbors, the one who says only I can protect you. This is the oldest trick of every tyrant in every age. Distrust makes a nation vulnerable to domination. Unity makes a nation ungovernable by tyrants. How the people must reclaim trust, or lose their republic. 1. Trust first in the American ideal. You need not trust every leader, every institution, or every citizen, but you must trust the idea that free people can govern themselves. If you lose faith in that, you lose the republic. 2. Grant to others the good intentions you claim for yourself. If you believe you act from love of country, you must allow that others do also, even if their conclusions differ. 3. Resist those who profit from turning citizens against one another. Division is not only a political strategy, it is a tool of control. 4. Rebuild the habit of civil disagreement. Argument is not the enemy of democracy. Contempt is. 5. See your fellow American not as a rival, but as a partner in the great experiment. Your future is shared, your destiny intertwined. A republic fails when it becomes divided beyond repair. America has not yet fully crossed that line. You still have within you the strength to rebuild trust, to remember your purpose, to stand again as citizens, not combatants. In the next chapter, I shall speak of the fourth truth, how the slow erosion of civic virtue threatens liberty as surely as armies once did. For now, look to your neighbors. See them not as adversaries, but as allies misunderstood. The fourth truth, liberty fails when civic virtue fades. If truth is the foundation and trust its mortar, then civic virtue, the character of a free people, is the shield that guards liberty against every encroaching danger. A nation can survive disagreement. It can survive corruption. It can survive hardship. But it cannot survive apathy. For when people cease to care for liberty, liberty ceases to care for them. The greatest strength of 1776 was not muskets, it was character. I wrote in Common Sense that freedom is the birthright of all mankind. Yet I learned quickly that freedom cannot be sustained by wish, sentiment, or even bravery alone. It requires the willingness of ordinary people to take responsibility for the fate of their nation. America was born because people got involved, Washington won because farmers left their plows, apprentices left their shops and mothers held farms together while sons froze in winter camps. The revolution was not a victory of soldiers over soldiers, it was a victory of citizens over indifference. Today, I see a different kind of threat. You possess freedoms that my generation bled to secure. You elect your leaders, speak your mind, worship freely, assemble without fear. But I observe with growing concern a dangerous habit: many citizens treat these freedoms as conveniences rather than responsibilities. Too many believe, someone else will defend liberty. Someone else will fix the country. My single voice, vote, or vigilance does not matter. Democracy cannot survive on autopilot. It requires effort, attention and participation. Freedom is not the fruit of a moment. It is the harvest of constant tending. How civic virtue erodes in modern times. 1. The temptation to spectate rather than act. Politics has become spectacle, a sport, theatre. But a republic is not entertainment, it is a partnership. 2. The temptation of outrage without responsibility. Many speak fiercely, yet do nothing measurable for their communities. 3. The temptation to treat opponents as enemies. A free people must argue, but they must also cooperate. 4. The temptation to disengage because the system seems imperfect. Every system is imperfect. Yet an imperfect democracy is worth more than a perfect tyranny. 5. The temptation to trust that freedom will endure simply because it has endured. This is the gravest error of all. History teaches that liberty is always temporary, unless guarded deliberately. Tyranny does not need you to love it. It only needs you to believe resistance is futile. Hopelessness is the most efficient weapon of control. Civic virtue, what it really means. Do not imagine civic virtue as something lofty or unreachable. It simply means showing up, paying attention, listening honestly, thinking critically, disagreeing honorably, acting locally, voting faithfully, protecting the vulnerable, resisting political violence, holding leaders to standards, loving your country enough to improve it. What happens when civic virtue fails? When the people neglect their duties, ambitious leaders fill the vacuum. If citizens do not govern themselves, they will be governed by those who desire power more than responsibility. This is how democracies fall, by complacency, by overwhelming indifference. If the fourth truth warned that civic virtue is fading, then the fifth truth confronts the next, deeper danger, the one every tyrant through history has mastered, the weaponization of fear, to quietly, artfully, deliberately, turn free citizens into obedient subjects. Remember this, you are not merely inheritors of liberty. You are its caretakers. You hold the pen that writes the future. And the world is watching to see what you will write next. The fifth truth. Fear is the oldest tool of tyrants. If truth is the foundation, trust the mortar, and civic virtue the shield, then fear, if left unchecked, is the hammer that shatters them all. Let me speak with urgency, for urgency is now required. Every tyranny in history has begun with the same whisper: be afraid. Afraid of your neighbor, of dissent, of uncertainty, of change, of the future, of those unlike yourself, of speaking, of thinking, of questioning. Fear is not merely an emotion. It is a political strategy. And it is older than my bones. Fear was the unseen enemy of 1776. Before the revolution began, Britain convinced many colonists that the king was their protector, their neighbors were rebels, resistance was treason, the army was invincible, defeat was inevitable, liberty was dangerous. A frightened people will defend their chains. I walked among men who whispered, "What if the king is right? What if we lose everything? What if liberty fails? What if rebellion brings chaos worse than tyranny?" To which I answered with my pen, "These are the times that try men's souls." For fear tried us then, as it tries you now. The modern world has discovered new ways to manufacture fear. You have placed in every hand a device capable of producing fear every hour, every minute, every second. You face fear delivered as headlines crafted to alarm, rumors engineered to enrage, images designed to divide, voices paid to provoke, platforms that reward panic, leaders who profit from dread, factions that define the world by enemies. Fear is now automated, weaponized, monetized, and distributed at unprecedented scale. My friends, you fear too much, too often, and for the benefit of too few. Why fear is so effective? Tyrants favor fear for a simple reason: a fearful population will trade freedom for the illusion of safety. Under fear's spell, people become more obedient, more tribal, more suspicious, more easily manipulated, more dependent on strong voices, less tolerant, less thoughtful, less free. Fear makes the mind narrow. A narrow mind is easy to lead. Fear makes the heart hard. A hard heart is easy to divide. Fear makes the citizen small. A small citizen cannot carry a great republic. Fear always points you toward an enemy, real or invented. Throughout history, leaders who seek control divide citizens by convincing them, "You are in danger. You must follow me." They are the threat. They stole your prosperity. They corrupted your culture. They cheated your elections. They silence your faith. They hate your nation. They are coming for you. There is a recurring character in every tyranny. My friends, whenever a voice tells you to hate your neighbor, mark that voice as the true threat. For in a republic, the people are not each other's enemies. The only enemy is whoever convinces citizens otherwise. How free citizens conquer fear. The solution to fear is not blind optimism or silence. It is courage. Practical, informed, ordinary courage. Let me offer you the same principles we relied on in 1776. 1. Name fear for what it is. Fear thrives in shadows, it dies in light. 2. Be skeptical of any voice that uses fear as its main argument. If they need fear to persuade you, they lack truth to convince you. 3. Refuse to let fear define your neighbors. A republic collapses when citizens fear one another more than tyranny itself. 4. Do not grant safety to those who peddle panic. Fearmongers prosper only when you lend them your attention. 5. Recall that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Courage is the backbone of self-government. Liberty and fear cannot reign together. Choose one, and the other must retreat. A frightened people cannot remain free, for fear prepares the mind to accept any master who promises protection. This is the danger I see in your age, the pervasive fear that weakens the bond between citizens and strengthens the grip of those who seek to divide them. I shall reveal next the sixth truth, how tyranny grows slowly, inch by inch, norm by norm, silence by silence, until the people awake to find their house no longer theirs. For now, stand firm. Stand free. Stand unafraid. For courage was the first victory of 1776, and it must be the first victory of your age as well. The sixth truth. Tyranny arrives slowly, disguised as normalcy. Thus far I have spoken of truth, trust, civic virtue, and fear, the foundations upon which your republic stands or falls. Now I turn to a truth so subtle, so quiet, that many free nations never notice it until it is too late. Tyranny does not usually arrive as a thunderclap. It arrives as a dimmer switch. Not a sudden darkness, but a slow fading of light. Let me speak plainly, for this truth must strike home: what you tolerate today becomes your ruler tomorrow. The colonies nearly lost themselves, through normalized abuse. Before the Revolution, the British government rarely enacted tyranny all at once. Instead, they employed a tactic as old as power itself: incremental oppression. First a tax. Then a restriction. Then a crackdown. Then a troop presence. Then an arrest. Then censorship. Then violence. Each step, taken alone, might be excused by some: it is inconvenient, but manageable. It is unfair, but temporary. It is troubling, but perhaps necessary. Until finally, the colonies found themselves bowing under the cumulative weight of hundreds of small injustices that together formed one large, undeniable truth: they were no longer free. That realization ignited the revolution. But it took years, years of drift, to see clearly what had happened. Your age faces a more sophisticated version of the same trap. The erosion of liberty in your time is more refined, more psychological, more disguised. It does not usually come as a single law, a single leader, or a single crisis. It comes as a series of small abandonments: a norm dismissed, a right ignored, an institution undermined, a truth replaced with rumor, a neighbor recast as an enemy, a violent act excused, a lie tolerated, a precedent broken, a guardrail unheeded. Each seems small, survivable, not worth the argument, but together they form a slow and steady descent into something no one intended and few recognize. Tyranny rarely declares itself. It simply asks that you stop noticing its arrival. Yet, many Americans of the 250th year are like the frog in the pot, slowly coming to a boil, standing at a precipice. Your age contains the same symptoms that preceded the fall of many other nations. A leader declaring he alone can fix the nation, whole groups labeled criminals or infiltrators, military force used against civilians, elections declared invalid when they do not favor the powerful, opponents treated as enemies of the state, loyalists rewarded while dissenters punished, a cult of personality replacing civic virtue, propaganda dressed as news, and news dismissed as propaganda, violence winked at, excused, or glorified, citizens divided by race, religion, region, and party. The growing belief that the other side must be crushed, not convinced. The deadliest sentence a citizen of a republic can utter is, "That's just how it is now." For with these words, a free people surrenders more than a right: they surrender their expectation of freedom. Once that expectation is gone, liberty becomes an exception, not a guarantee. And the powerful, whether political, economic, or ideological, take note of your lowered defenses. They learn what you will tolerate. They learn what you will forget. They learn what you will excuse. And then they press further. Not because they are devils, but because power is human and humans test boundaries. If citizens do not defend their boundaries, no one else will. Your unrealized superpower? Many Americans today feel overwhelmed, convinced that the nation's fate rests only in the hands of the wealthy, the extreme, or the well-connected. This belief is false. Let me offer the revelation that my generation understood deeply: the slow erosion of liberty can be stopped by the slow accumulation of courage. Every citizen holds a lever of democracy, small levers, perhaps, too small to seem meaningful. But 1,000 small levers can move mountains. Here is the truth you must grasp: tyranny grows when citizens shrug. Democracy grows when citizens refuse to shrug. This is your moment, the moment you see that freedom is not defended by grand gestures, but by countless small refusals: refuse to excuse violence. Refuse to normalize lies. Refuse to dehumanize neighbors. Refuse to be silent when norms are broken. Refuse to accept leaders who mock the Constitution. Refuse to abandon your civic duty. Refuse to disengage. A nation is not defined by its borders but by its freedoms. America's greatness does not spring from wealth, geography, or military might, but from the liberties carved into existence by the courage of its people. These freedoms, speech, conscience, press, assembly, due process, were not gifts. They were taken, pulled from the clenched fist of an empire by those willing to risk everything. You inherited them as though they were natural, but in truth they were won by unnatural bravery. Let me remind you how easily they could have been lost. Freedom of speech, the right to speak without fear. In the 18th century, words could be crimes. To question the crown was treason. To propose independence was madness, and punishable by death. When I published Common Sense, British officers scoured the colonies for its author. Had they found me, my pamphlet would have been the last thing I ever wrote. Yet the people read it loudly and publicly. They passed it from hand to hand, from tavern to town square, until the arguments of freedom became the voice of the continent. Speech is the first guardian of liberty. Silence is the first victory of tyranny. Freedom of the press, the right to question power. Publishers risked their livelihoods every time they set type. Presses were seized. Editors arrested. Newspapers destroyed. During the war, British patrols raided printers suspected of supporting independence. A free press was viewed not as a civic good, but as a weapon against authority. And so it is. For without the ability to expose corruption, question leaders, and tell unvarnished truths, power becomes unrestrained, and unrestrained power is always abusive. In the bleak winter of 1776-77, when morale was lowest and desertion highest, Washington asked me to write words that could stiffen the spine of a nation. I wrote by night, fleeing patrols, moving my work between barns, basements, and secret rooms. British soldiers hunted for the author of writings that stirred rebellion. At one point, I hid the plates beneath a loose floorboard and escaped out a back window as troops approached. Had I been caught, I would have been silenced. Yet the words reached the army. Washington read them aloud to his men. These are the times that try men's souls. Those words were carried like torches through darkness. Your freedoms were paid for by courage, ink, and the willingness to defy fear. Your press today is louder, broader, and more ungovernable than any the founders imagined. This is a blessing. And also why it is under attack. Freedom of assembly, the right to stand together. Before Lexington and Concord, colonists were forbidden to gather in groups deemed unsettling. Town meetings required permission from the Crown's officers. Suspicion alone could disperse a crowd. And yet, the revolution began precisely because people gathered despite those orders in churches, in taverns, on commons, in fields, to argue, debate, and decide what kind of future was worth fighting for. A people who cannot assemble are not a people. They are subjects. Due process, the shield against arbitrary power? British soldiers could storm a colonist's home with little cause. Trials could be held in far-off courts without juries. Punishments were swift and severe. Imagine living under a government where at any moment you might be seized for offending an official or fitting a profile, losing your property without recourse, your reputation without defense. Many in your modern America are already experiencing these abuses. This was the world the founders knew. This is the world they refused to leave to you. It is why they enshrined protections for the accused, safeguards against corrupt policing, and boundaries that power must never cross. Every erosion of due process is an erosion of America. Today, freedoms are seldom taken with a bayonet. They are surrendered quietly, when citizens stop questioning authority, when propaganda overwhelms truth, when leaders denounce inconvenient journalism, when fear is used to justify cruelty, when neighbors are turned into enemies, when power is trusted too easily. Liberty does not die all at once. It dies by neglect. Freedom earned in blood is too often lost in comfort. Freedom is lost when the abnormal becomes normalized. Power is taken when complacency allows it. This, my reader, is the sixth truth. All other truths combined will help prevent its oppressive encroachment and forge a path where you may reclaim it. Carry this with you as a reminder: the normalcy you crave to restore is a shared vision of many. Of the present ability of America. How we must preserve democracy. My beloved guardians of the great experiment. When first I stepped upon this continent in 1774, I found a people uncertain of their strength, divided in their loyalties, and fearful of the might arrayed against them. Yet even then, I sensed a spark, one that might ignite a world. I wrote Common Sense to remind them who they were. That same spark still burns in you. You may think the dangers we faced were greater. But hear me plainly, the gravest threats to liberty are never the ones your ancestors faced. They are the ones you ignore. You stand at the edge of your nation's 250th year. A milestone the founders could scarcely imagine. A birthday for the greatest political experiment ever dared by humankind. But this celebration is not guaranteed. The republic you inherited was carved from hunger, frost, and terror. It was not built by the comfortable, nor preserved by the indifferent. Yet I find a curious truth: the people who benefit most from liberty have grown least accustomed to labor for it. You speak of rights as though they are decorations. You expect freedoms to be renewable without renewal. You believe democracy is self-winding. For the colonists, comfort was rare, wealth was scarce, leisure was nearly non-existent, and yet they built a nation. For modern Americans, comfort is abundant, wealth exists at unprecedented levels, leisure has become a defining feature of life, and yet the nation feels fragile. The time has come once again when sacrifice, not of blood, but of apathy, shall be required. The sacrifice of listening to those you despise, the sacrifice of admitting when you were misled, the sacrifice of giving time to your community, the sacrifice of courageously insisting on truth, even among allies, the sacrifice of refusing hatred, even when encouraged, the sacrifice of placing country above faction. None demand a man freeze to death at Valley Forge. Yet many resist them more fiercely than the hardships of 1776. Your republic will not fall for lack of comfort, it will fall for lack of character, unless character returns. Your daily decisions shape the nation more than you know. Here is the simple, practical truth: the behaviors that save democracy are ordinary, not extraordinary. They are behaviors available to everyone. Slow down your certainty. Read from multiple, opposing sources. When lies fill the air, speak truth. Remember that truth is not partisan. Listen generously. Challenge misinformation kindly but firmly. Value truth over tribe. Remember, ugly and untrue things can be labeled beautiful or truth by the masters of deceit. Resist leaders who dismiss all criticism as lies. Recognize your emotions are being used against you. Vote. Volunteer. Question those who make you afraid of fellow citizens. Support institutions that hold power accountable. Reward courage. Reject cruelty. See one another as human. Teach your children that liberty is both a blessing and a burden. When power drifts toward tyranny, pull the rope of law with the weight of citizen courage. When cruelty is justified in the name of safety, answer plainly: we do not secure America by destroying what makes her American. I tell you this with the same urgency that moved my hand in the winter of 1776, your republic is in danger not because you are weak, but because you have forgotten you are strong. The founders were not giants. They were people, merchants, farmers, immigrants, soldiers, thinkers made mighty by a common decision, to act. Not someday. Not once the path is clear. But immediately. Now the mantle falls to you. You who can read these words, share these words, discuss these words. Speak, march, vote, organize, question, protect, and build. For the power of a people, once awakened, is greater than any office, any army, any demagogue, any faction, any fear. If millions do these small things, tyranny has no foothold. The incremental erosion of democracy is defeated by the incremental exercise of citizenship. This is the antidote. This is the roadmap. If you wish to keep your republic, you must become the generation that stops waiting for someone else to save it. Not the courts. Not the candidates. Not the commentators. Not the slogans or the saviors. You. I end this letter as I ended the first: the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. Then, I wrote those words with hope. Now, I write them with a plea. Do not fail this cause. Do not fail yourselves. Do not fail the generations yet unborn who will one day ask what you did when liberty trembled. Let them say you chose courage. Let them say you chose truth. Let them say you chose each other. Let them say you saved the Republic. Your faithful and devoted supporter of freedom, Thomas Paine. In the continuing great test of the American experiment.